Hi everyone, this is Project Talks with Ankit, and welcome back to part 2 of Scope Management Masterclass. Now, if you haven't seen part 1 yet, I highly recommend watching that first because we have covered the entire foundation: plan scope, collect requirement, define scope, and creating the WBS. Now, in this video, we take the next step. We will validate deliverables, control changes, prevent scope creep, and understand how everything ties into the PMP exam. Now let's begin with the fifth process: validate scope. So now that we have understood how the plan scope, collect requirement, define scope, and create WBS works, let's move to our next process, which is validate scope. Now, validate scope is where we get formal acceptance of deliverables from stakeholders. It is not about testing quality. It is about confirming that what was delivered matches the agreed scope. Here, the key input includes verified deliverables and scope baseline. Now, the main output is accepted deliverables or a change request if discrepancies are found. Now, let's look at a scope validation form. This is the form which is used during validate scope process to capture stakeholder reviews and sign off. Give me a minute. Let me just quickly open one scope validation form for you. This is the scope validation form. It's a simple but very powerful document. It ensures that the client or stakeholder reviews each deliverable, provides feedback, and officially signs off. Let's walk through it. Now we have columns like deliverable, reviewed by, date reviewed, feedback, and acceptance. In this example, you can see that the login module was reviewed by the sponsor on 20th of October. The feedback says meets requirement and it is accepted. The expense tracker was reviewed by BA team on 22nd of October. It has a feedback that there is a minor UI improvement, but it is still accepted. On the other hand, when you look at the budget module, it was reviewed by QA lead on 25th. However, the feedback says it's pending UAT sign off. Hence, it is not accepted. Now, this document serves as a proof of validation. It's an output of the validate scope process and becomes part of your project records. When you close the project, you will use these forms to demonstrate your deliverables were formally accepted. So next time you are asked, how do we know that the client signed off? You can point straight to this form. Now let's understand validate scope with an example. In the TechNova app project, once the budget tracker module is delivered, the sponsor reviews it against the approved requirements and signs it off. The sign off ensures traceability and stakeholder satisfaction. That brings us to the PMP Insight Bite. Now understand, the verification checks deliverables internally. The validation is when the client formally accepts them. So this is the difference, right? We verified internally to ensure that once it is validated from the client, it is formally accepted. All right, it's quiz time now. Now here's the one that trips people up. During testing, a deliverable fails QA but perfectly matches the scope baseline. Is it accepted under validate scope? Comment yes or no and why. All right. So far we have discussed plan scope management, collect requirement, define scope, creating WBS, validate scope. Now let's come to the final one, which is control scope. Control scope. This is where the change control comes into play. Control scope ensures that any scope change goes through formal approval and that the project stays aligned with the baseline. It's actually quite simple. Understand it like this. Whenever a stakeholder requests a change, say adding a new feature, it's logged evaluated for impact, and processed through a change control board. Approved changes lead to updates in the scope baseline, schedule, and cost. Rejected ones are documented and communicated properly. This discipline keeps your project from spiraling due to unapproved changes. Now let's look at a change request log. This ensures that every proposed change is tracked, reviewed, and approved before updating in the scope baseline. Let me just open one for you. Give me a minute. All right. Now let's look at how we handle changes. This is a change request log for the Technova Financial App project. Now, every project, no matter how well planned, will face change requests. What matters is whether you manage them in a controlled, documented way or not. This table here captures all the essential details for each change. You can see columns like CRID, description, raised by, what is the impact with respect to time or cost, status, and approved by. Let's take a look at the first entry. Let's talk about CR001. Now, it's basically description says add biometric login option. It was raised by the sponsor and it has an impact of 2 days and 50,000 rupees. This was approved by Priya Nair. The next one, CR002, include investment tracker feature. It was rejected because it would add 10 extra days and significantly increased cost. It was rejected by CCB. Now, this is the key. Every change request goes through CCB where impact on time, cost, and scope are assessed before approval. Only approved changes are reflected in the updated scope baseline. Now, keeping a log like this ensures transparency. So, if later someone asks who approved this feature, you have the record right there. This is exactly what a control scope process means in practice, controlling what enters your project and what doesn't. All right, time for the final challenge. A stakeholder reports extra work done outside approved scope. What is your first step as a PM? Very tricky one. Will you update the baseline or will you first raise a change request? Do mention your answers in the comment. All right. Now let's review a sample scope document just to sum it up all together. All right. So we have made a scope document for Technova Financial App. As you can see, it has the version mentioned and the date and who's the owner of this document, right? So it's version 1.0 dated 15th of October and owner is Ankit. Now it starts with purpose. The purpose of this scope management plan is defined how the project scope will be identified, defined, validated, and controlled throughout the project lifecycle. This ensures that the project delivers only what is required, preventing scope creep and ensuring alignment with stakeholder expectation. So the purpose is very clear here. Now, when we look at the project objective, develop and deploy a secure real-time financial tracking mobile app that enables users to manage their budget, analyze spending, and receive personalized financial insights. It talks about what is in scope. Things like banking API, transaction dashboard, budget planner module, etc. are in scope. It also documents what is out of scope, like cryptocurrency integration, third party advertisement integration, etc. Here are the deliverables. It has deliverable IDs, what is the name, what is the description, and who owns this, whether it is from the development lead, backend team, who approves it, who is the owner. It also talks about the acceptance criteria like minimum 95% test pass rate, application load time under 3 seconds, and things like that. Assumptions documents, very important. It documents the assumptions as well. All required APIs will be available and accessible at all time. These are the assumptions. We also assume that stakeholders will provide timely feedback on deliverables. Between you and me, this is easier said than done. Constraints: fixed project timeline for 4 months, limited resources, budget not exceeding. Scope change control process. It documents the scope change control processes and the version control. All versions of the document will be stored in the Technova project repository. Each version will be tagged with a unique version number and change summary to maintain traceability. It also says who approved the document and when. So basically, this is the whole document. All the processes combine to make this one document, which is very important. All right. So now we have seen the sample document. Now let's understand some of the common scope mistakes. Now let's look at some of the most common scope mistakes I have seen in real projects and the ones you will definitely want to avoid. Now, first is skipping stakeholder inputs during requirement collection. That's how you end up building something nobody actually asked for. Involve the key stakeholders early. It will save your major rework later. Second, treating your WBS as a task list instead of a list of deliverables. Remember, WBS focuses on what needs to be delivered, not how it's done. Mixing the two creates confusion and weakens your baseline. Third, not maintaining a proper requirement traceability matrix. Now, without that RTM, you lose the link between what was requested and what was delivered. And that's a fast track to audit issues. Fourth, allowing scope creep through informal approvals. Now, a small just add this one thing can snowball into a big delay and cost overturn. Always, always use formal change control. And finally, poor documentation of out of scope items. If you don't clearly list what's excluded, you will end up debating later over what was never part of the deal. So remember, avoiding these five mistakes is half the battle won in keeping your project scope strong and under control. Alright, now that we have covered what not to do, let's talk about the best practices that will help you keep your project scope rock solid. First, engage your stakeholders early and often. Don't wait until the end to get their feedback. Involve them right from requirement collection through validation. It builds alignment and trust. Second, always baseline your scope before execution. Without an approved scope baseline, you have no benchmark to measure changes or performance against. Next, maintain a detailed requirement traceability matrix. It is your single source of truth that connects every needs to its final deliverable. Keep it updated throughout the project. And the fourth, use visual tools like Lucid Chart or MS Project to build your WBS. Seeing your deliverables in structure format makes communication with stakeholders so much easier. Understand, you will never get enough time from a stakeholder. You will always have to make sure that they're able to understand just by looking at the thing as well. And finally, review your scope regularly during the monitoring and controlling phase. It's not a one time activity. Continuous check help you catch changes and misalignments before they turn into bigger issues. Follow these five best practices will make your scope management not just compliant with PMP standards, but truly effective in real world delivery. Now let's connect everything we have learned to the PMP exam perspective, because this is exactly where many situational questions come from. First, understand the relationship between WBS and scope baseline. The WBS, along with scope statement and WBS dictionary, is your scope baseline. PMP loves testing how these pieces fit together. Second, know how scope creep is controlled. The moment a stakeholder asks for something new, it goes through a change control process, not directly into your project plan. Third, be clear about the inputs and outputs of the validate scope and control scope processes. For example, a validate scope output accepted deliverables, while control scope generates change request when something ships. And finally, don't mix up quality control and scope validation. Now understand, the quality control checks if the deliverables met specification, while scope validation confirms if the right deliverables were accepted by the customer. Now, if you can connect these dots from theory to practice, you'll be ready to handle any scope related question that comes your way in the PMP exam. All right. Now, that wraps up the deep dive into scope management, the foundation of every project success. In the next video, we will move to schedule management. This is where we will learn how to convert scope into timeline, dependencies, and critical path. Now, if you found this video valuable, please like, comment, and subscribe to Project Talks with Ankit. Tell me in the comment what is the biggest scope challenge you have faced in your project. See you in the next one. Bye for now. Thank you so much.